How do you troubleshoot skill development? Hi everyone, Ader here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. I was recently working with a coach and he was having trouble with one of his swimmers breathing. Specifically, the swimmer was breathing and then the opposite arm was dropping out of position prior to getting the head back, and they were missing out on a lot of the pull. So he was asking me, how do I typically address this problem? Regardless of the skill, my approach is always to use the most effective strategy first. And in the case of breathing, I'm almost always going to use paddle cap freestyle in order to create change as fast as possible. So all that is swimmers are going to swim with a paddle on their head. And if they breathe by lifting the head or pulling it to the side, that paddle is going to come off. And so it's going to give them really clear and instant feedback that they need to clean up the breath. The coach told me that he'd used that strategy, and the swimmer was actually able to do it pretty well without the paddle coming off, but that arm was still sliding out to the side when they took the breath. Something was still wrong. For some reason, that opposite arm kept drifting out, and even though the swimmer was able to perform paddle cap freestyle pretty well, I still felt, and the coach agreed with me, that breathing was still likely part of the problem. It just wasn't being addressed with paddle cap freestyle. And since paddle cap freestyle tends to ensure that swimmers are breathing straight and low, I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. But then I saw the video and it made sense. The swimmer did have a low breath and a straight breath, which is why they were able to still execute paddle cap freestyle well. However, the recovery of the breath was really long and really slow. So the breath was really low and straight, but they were getting stuck breathing to the side and holding that position throughout the entire arm recovery. The breath itself was okay, but the timing was off. And so for her, she needed a new solution. When swimmers have really long breaths, I found that it's usually a visual problem. When they take that long breath, they're literally watching whatever's happening over the surface of the water. And because they're waiting to look, focus, and then see what's happening, that's going to take a lot longer than if they weren't seeing anything and they were just focused on getting the head back after each stroke. In this case, a really good solution can be closing the eyes when breathing. So while they're swimming, their eyes are open and they take the breath, they close the eyes, they keep the eyes closed until the head comes back under the water. This takes away the visual element because they're literally not seeing anything, and it almost always tends to speed up the breath. An alternative is you can have swimmers just focus on the bottom of the pool and they want to return their focus to the bottom of the pool as fast as possible. So if you just tell them to always be looking at the bottom of the pool, that's necessarily going to speed up the breath so they can get back to looking at the bottom of the pool as fast as possible. Again, you're changing what they're focusing on visually, and that's going to create a change in terms of how long the breath is, especially when there's a delayed recovery of the head after taking the breath. So for this swimmer, we use the most effective strategy, which is paddle cap freestyle, to eliminate the obvious errors and make sure she wasn't committing those errors. Then, once we knew the problem was something else, we tried to take a secondary approach which addressed that other problem. We had to be a little bit more specific with her situation. We had to use a little bit different activity in order to get the job done. While I used the example of breathing, this demonstrates how effective coaching works. It's about identifying the root problem and then providing swimmers with an appropriate activity to help them solve that problem. The process was started by using a strategy that's very effective most of the time and typically creates change. Then it's a matter of evaluating what happens. If you get what you're looking for, you're good to go. If you don't, you have to figure out what's wrong and then give them a new activity that's more specific to the problem at hand. So rather than just telling swimmers what to do, you're selecting appropriate activities that make it much more likely that they're going to find better solutions to the skills that they're trying to improve. It's not a passive process where you just give swimmers the perfect set and then they magically swim fast. You have to watch what's happening and make some adjustments based upon what you see for individual swimmers. At the same time, you're not trying to create change by providing a lot of instruction and a lot of feedback. Selecting the right activities is going to allow those activities to do a lot of the work for you. This is another reason why it's important to have multiple strategies, multiple solutions for the same problem. You might use one of them most of the time, and in our breathing example, paddle cap freestyle is something I use most of the time. But sometimes you're going to need a secondary strategy or a different strategy in order to get the job done for certain swimmers. And when that's the case, you'll be glad you have the options. So I always try to start with the best options, and if that doesn't work, start figuring out why it didn't work, and then take a secondary approach. Another example would be using stroke counts to help swimmers improve their stroke length. It's a great starting point for helping swimmers learn to get long in a variety of different situations. However, it's not always immediately effective, or swimmers find ways to cheat the stroke count and get around what you're trying to help them learn. So that's when you might need to take a secondary approach. If they're lowering their stroke count by just kicking a lot, well, then you add a buoy and they can't do that any longer. They'll have to use the arms. If they're gliding a lot, you give them a certain time standard that they meet, and they won't be able to meet that standard if they just glide to get really low stroke counts. And if they're struggling to use the arms effectively to create propulsion, you can use different hand postures like closed fist, OK signs, or upside down paddles to help them better become more aware of how they're using their arms to create propulsion. It's about starting off with using a strategy that eliminates most of the problems most of the time, and then using extra strategies, extra activities to clean up the rest of the problems. The key to success is having a clear understanding of what you're trying to develop. You want to know what those skills look like, you want to know what could cause poor skills to happen, and you want to have different options to solve those problems. It takes time to develop these skills, but with patience and consistency, you can start making big changes fast by understanding what's happening and how to fix it. Hope that was helpful, and as always, keep it simple.